pick up the microphone. Either one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Give me a 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome back to the Conservative Commandos radio show, coming to you from CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. And joining us now is Charles Kilmer. Charles, you and I have talked in past CPACs about water.
Sure.
And water, I love water. I love water so much.
Life.
I built a pond in our backyard because my wife said she always wanted a house overlooking water. So we have our little pond. But you know, there's been a lot of talk over the past few weeks about water, particularly in California. They're being deluged now by rain, but that has followed like 8 years of drought. California has always been of interest to me because it's basically a desert area like Arizona and whatever, and everybody wants to live there. Charles, what are they going to drink?
Well, the problem with talking to people in the East is that everybody's in the East who's got water. Water is cheap. So this is like an unknown country for people in the East. But to understand California, in fact, to understand anything west of the Mississippi, you've got to be able to talk about water. California, especially Republicans, used to know something about water. For about 50 years, Republican governors, Republican officials from about 1920 to about 1970 built an entire water infrastructure for California. It's a huge monument to it. Governor Moonbeam's father, Pat Brown, was actually the last of these governors who understood it and worked on the infrastructure. After about 1970, they stopped. They didn't even maintain it. They had done nothing. It was just something like the air they breathed. And so what you hear when you hear the story of the dam spillway that almost busted was a story about no maintenance. They have not even done minimal maintenance on these things. All their money has gone to illegals, to supporting populations that are not legally there, and so it's a matter of their priorities. Their interest has not been in native Californians, but people who are not native Californians, and as a result, the infrastructure has declined.
Well, wait a minute, but just 1 second. I wanted to follow this up. So California has had this water problem. I know in past we've also talked about desalinization of water.
Correct.
And okay, California has a lot of water right now because they had all this rain.
Correct.
The reservoirs are up. But long-term plans, is desalinization of water practical for a state like California?
Well, the water at current prices, we're all talking price here, is not all that practical for anything besides municipal purposes. The reason that you know that is because the Poseidon plant, which is the big marquee desalination plant, brings in water for about $2,000 an acre foot. They can get to understand that you have to know that they can get water from Fort Meade for about $600 an acre foot from that canal. If you fly from the East Coast to L.A., you can see this little ribbon of water that goes to L.A. They get for about $600 an acre foot. Mm-hmm. And so the 2,000, that's really expensive. The name of the game for water desalination is to make it much cheaper. Now that's really the holy grail. The interesting thing is, I'll tell you a story here. You want to hear it?
Sure.
Interesting thing is that the same drought that you were talking about with California and the Southwest, it actually started about 2000, also hit Israel and Syria. And after 6 years of drought, the Syrians brought a delegation over to the U.S. And we had a meeting across the Potomac here in Crystal City, and where their officials went through and pumped the U.S. desalination research community for ideas. We were happy to give them, because the U.S. desalinization is totally constricted by regulation. Mm-hmm. In order to understand what I mean by regulation, it took the Israelis as well as the Australians and everybody else about 2 or 3 years to build a desalination plant. The Poseidon plant in Southern California took 20 years. 20 years to do that. And so what the Israelis did is they listened carefully. They listened carefully to American desalination experts. And I was peppering them with ideas as well as anybody else. They went back to Israel, and they developed a desalinization system that has made them water independent forever. Not just for their urban environments, but for their rural environments, for their agriculture. So they have brought desalinized water to agriculture, and they do it for $500 an acre foot for desalinized water. That is world breaking. That is the understand that is just what's possible. What becomes possible because of the Israeli work is fundamentally changes the world. If that doesn't make any sense to you, then understand that we are currently on a high wire act because the Syrians had the same drought happen to them. Same drought, same circumstances. They rolled over and died. All of their farmers went bankrupt. All their people went to the Syrian cities where they became cannon fodder for the civil war there that went on in Syria, and then subsequently became refugees that were sent to Europe. So there you have in two countries, one is an amazingly profound vision of what can happen in the future. And on the other hand, a profoundly apocalyptic version of what can also happen. And so that's actually in the story of Israel and Syria is actually the knife's edge that civilization is balanced on right now. And in order to understand that for the U.S., after 1970, the U.S. moved from a world of unlimited resources. We believed in unlimited resources as far as the eye could see, to a world of limited resources and population and restrained population growth. If you look in the popular media, all of the movies about the future, like a Mad Max or even 2001: Space Odyssey, that begins in a desert and ends in infantilism. They all of the secular visions of the near future, a couple of decades away, turned apocalyptic, the dystopian, and whereas all of the ones of the far future turned like Star Wars and Star Trek. They were interesting things about what happened. We just didn't know how to get from here to there, and so. The point that I'm trying to make is that water desalinization, if you make it cheap enough, you can turn whole countries green.
Well, one thing that, from what I understand about California, is, like you were saying, they have ignored the water infrastructure for a long time.
Correct.
Do you think that water desalinization could be a cheaper alternative to upgrading their dams, building new dams, things like that?
Oh, good question. What I can't give you I can say that. How do I say this? The technology is currently it's going to happen actually that the water desalinization will be cheap enough for desert farming, for example, in 10 or 15 years.
Wow.
That's built into the technology.
You got dams. I mean, if you don't dam a river, it's going to flow to the ocean.
Correct.
But the California population has increased dramatically in the last 30 or 40 years.
Yep.
But they've not built a single dam.
Correct.
And so that's a simple process.
Correct.
The environmentalists say, no dams. You could interrupt the smell darters or something.
Correct.
Like that.
I totally agree with what's technologically doable right now. In fact, what has been on the California has built a, how do I say this? After 1970, when they finished the infrastructure, they set up a new series of plans for new dams in California. That stuff is actually on the books. They never implemented because of the conservationists. California can actually do that, and that they can do that with current technology. But it's yes. Now it won't. The problem with it is that it will not do for places like San Diego. It will. You can't get that water. That water becomes more expensive for LA and South. And for example, if you want to bring water to the deserts of Southern California, but that would be the solution to the Salinas Valley. To Salinas Valley, because they have a couple of dams planned for that. They never implemented. So
seems to me when you're talking about San Diego being right on the coast, it might be perfect use for water desalinization in a city like San Diego.
Correct.
Hey Charles, it's great to see you again.
Thank you.
We understand you have a blog.
Yes, rdwaterpower.com, and tell your guests to come visit it. What I really want to do is, the main point of doing this is that I want your listeners to talk to their representatives, to say to Republicans and tell them the Republicans once understood water. They don't anymore. And if they can bring water back, especially water desalination.
You know when they'll start to understand, Charles? When they don't have anything to drink.
Yes.
You know, I'm serious, because that's what it seems like, what it takes people to understand we have a problem. The problem has to be biting them in the butt. You know, and let me ask you this last question. Do you, anything coming from the Trump administration? You know, he's talked about infrastructure. In that discussion about infrastructure, has there been any talk about water?
Well, what I've focused on with the Trump administration is their commitment to water, to energy dominance. In order to be energy dominant, you have to have the lowest cost energy. And one of the things that they're doing, that the Department of Energy is doing, and I'm sure that Trump will finish up because of Peter Thiel, is they will be working on fourth-generation nuclear reactors. What the fourth-generation nuclear reactors do is they collapse the cost in the first generation of electricity to 3 cents a kilowatt. To understand that, coal and natural gas are about 6 cents a kilowatt.
I agree with you, but you know what, Charles? Nuclear power has been demonized. I'm all for nuclear power. How do we get into people's heads that this is a clean, safe source of power?
Because the way you do that is because fourth-generation nuclear reactors are actually clean and safe. They are not the light water reactors.
And what I think people should understand, when you talk about 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl or whatever,
right,
that technology is 50 years old.
And that's the technology we're using today.
Yeah.
In fact, in the 1960s, in the Republican convention, Peter Thiel, who has a fourth-generation nuclear reactor plant, was one of the guys that talked about how amazingly, in the 1960s, the whole country was cutting edge. It wasn't just Silicon Valley, and the whole country was cutting edge. And that's what actually the way I remember it in the 1960s. I remember the whole country was. Then there was a sense of, well, gee, what the picture that was painted by. There was a TV series called The Jetsons, and everybody I know remembers it. And that's what we thought was going to happen in 10 or 20 years. That was the near future. It wasn't this dystopian thing. It was we were going to be flying out into space, and energy was going to be too cheap to meter. And so we could be able to do all kinds of things. Well, what's interesting about this day and age is that future is actually swinging back around into view again, and that's what Peter Thiel was talking about. And the reason he was talking about it because he knew about it, because that was one of his major investments was in fourth generation nuclear reactors, which are both clean and safe and really dirt cheap.
Yeah.
They produce, and that energy makes it, well, how do you say this? Something like about 9% of the total cost of energy in California is the cost of moving water around. Somewhere between 30% and 50% of the cost of water desalination is the cost of energy. You collapse the cost of energy, and suddenly, the world changes.
Charles Kilmer, great to see you again. And again, please tell our audience how they could find out more.
Bless you. My website is RD Water Power. You will see my blogs and observations there. It's an interesting world we're going to be moving into here in the near future.
Well, I've thought about this for quite some time. People are moving to California, Arizona, all these areas that don't have water. What are they going to do when they don't drink?
Okay.
Again, Charles Kilmer, thank you for joining us. Take care. God bless.
My pleasure. Thank you.